American generals realized they were standing in the middle of a scientific goldmine. But they also realized something terrifying. The Soviet Union was racing to capture the same knowledge. The war in Europe was ending, but another war was beginning. A quiet war, not fought with guns or soldiers, but with scientists, classified files, and secret missions. This was the moment the United States decided that it could not let German scientific talent fall into Soviet hands, no matter the moral cost. And so, in the shadows of victory, America launched one of the most controversial intelligence operations in its history, Operation Paperclip. It began with a single realization. The most powerful weapon of the next century wouldn't be tanks or bombs. It would be intellectual power, scientific intelligence. No man represented this more than Wernher von Braun, the brilliant, ambitious rocket engineer who had designed the V-2 rocket. The V-2 was unlike anything the world had ever seen. It could travel faster than sound, cross hundreds of kilometers, and hit cities like London without warning. It was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile, and it had reached the edge of space. Von Braun and his research team knew secrets that no American or Soviet scientist knew. They had solved problems in propulsion, guidance, multi-stage rocket systems, and aerodynamics years before anyone else. Von Braun understood that the end of the war meant the beginning of a new opportunity. So before Germany collapsed completely, he destroyed sensitive documents, gathered his key staff, and fled south to avoid Soviet capture. He wanted to surrender to the Americans because he believed they would value his scientific potential. And he was right. When American forces discovered von Braun and his team, they realized immediately that capturing him was equivalent to capturing decades of future scientific advancement. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was sweeping through eastern Germany, gathering everything it could: scientists, blueprints, equipment, and entire laboratories. Within months, the Soviets forcibly relocated more than 2,000 German scientists to the USSR. These men worked on rocket designs, jet propulsion, radar, nuclear research, and chemical weapons. The United States understood the consequences instantly. If the Soviets gained a technological advantage, it could rewrite the global balance of power. American intelligence agencies warned that whoever controlled German science would control the next 50 years. To prevent that outcome, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JEOA, was created. Their mission was clear: identify the most valuable German scientists, secure them, erase or hide their past affiliations with the Nazi regime, and quietly bring them to the United States. The code name Paperclip came from the paper clips used to attach secret notes to the scientists' files, notes that often said things like, "essential for national security," or "ignore political background." In those files were disturbing details: membership in the Nazi Party, connections to the SS, involvement in forced labor projects, and in some cases participation in human experiments. But higher officials made the decision that national security was more important than moral judgment. Many of these scientists were officially classified as enemy aliens, meaning they should never have been allowed into the United States. To bypass this, the government altered documents, rewrote biographies, and sealed records. Some files were destroyed entirely. What mattered was not what these men had done, but what they could do for America. When the scientists arrived in the U.S., they were placed in isolated military bases such as Fort Bliss in Texas, White Sands in New Mexico, and Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. These locations became the birthplace of America's missile and rocket programs. Under the supervision of U.S. military officers, former Nazi engineers were given homes, salaries, research laboratories, advanced equipment, and protection from prosecution. Their work began immediately. They rebuilt V-2 rockets from leftover parts, trained American soldiers in rocket technology, conducted high-altitude tests, and wrote technical documents that helped shape America's future defense systems. America's early missile development owes its foundations directly to these men. The Redstone missile, Jupiter C tests, and early ballistic missile prototypes were all heavily influenced or directly designed by German scientists. This was not a small contribution. This was the backbone of America's Cold War missile arsenal, and then came the space race. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite. It was a shock to America, a jolt that revealed just how far ahead the Soviets were in space technology. In response, the United States urgently accelerated its own space program. NASA was formed in 1958, and among its new recruits was Wernher von Braun, who quickly became one of its most influential leaders. Despite his Nazi past, he was given immense responsibility. He designed the Saturn V rocket, which would eventually carry American astronauts to the moon. When Neil Armstrong took his first step on the lunar surface in 1969, it was powered by technology that began in the laboratories of Nazi Germany. Operation Paperclip had succeeded. America had won the space race. America had built advanced missiles, satellites, and space exploration technologies. America's military might was now decades ahead of most nations. But this success came with a dark shadow. Many of the scientists brought to the U.S. had been involved in deeply unethical or criminal activities during the war. Some had used forced labor from concentration camps. Others had overseen experiments on prisoners. The U.S. government knew this, yet chose to ignore it. This is what made Operation Paperclip controversial, not the scientific achievements, but the moral compromises. Intelligence agencies blocked investigations, protected scientists from prosecution, and in some cases publicly defended them. Files were modified to remove mentions of war crimes. Records were sealed for decades. Even today, some documents remain classified, not because of military secrets, but because they contain details that could damage political legacies. Operation Paperclip reshaped the Cold War. It gave the United States a decisive advantage in missiles, space exploration, aerospace engineering, and military technology. It prevented the Soviet Union from gaining a monopoly on scientific expertise. It helped define global alliances and power structures for the next half-century, but it also revealed how nations, in moments of extreme pressure, often choose power over principles. As Operation Paperclip expanded through the late 1940s and early 1950s, the United States quietly absorbed not just German rocket engineers, but experts in dozens of scientific fields. Many of these men had worked directly under the Nazi regime, on projects that combined advanced engineering with brutal methods. But the U.S. government believed that in the era of the Cold War, losing this knowledge to the Soviet Union would be a far greater threat than the moral weight of recruiting former enemies. So the operation widened. Chemists, physicists, medical doctors, biologists, and intelligence specialists were quietly transported to America under modified identities. Their Nazi pasts were scrubbed, and in some cases, their entire history was rewritten to make them look like politically neutral scientists who were simply caught in the chaos of war. This effort was not small. More than 1,600 German scientists were brought into the United States through Operation Paperclip, but the total number affected by the broader intelligence mission was far higher. Thousands more were studied, tracked, interrogated, or incorporated into American research indirectly through captured files, blueprints, machinery, and test models. German laboratories that survived the bombings contained everything from advanced physics experiments to prototypes of weapons that would become the basis of the future arms race. One of the most important contributions came from German aeronautical research. By 1945, Germany had tested and built jet fighters like the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet-powered fighter aircraft. It flew faster and higher than anything the Allies had. German scientists also developed the Horten Ho 229, a prototype flying wing aircraft that looked like a modern stealth bomber and used advanced aerodynamic concepts far ahead of its time. American engineers, stunned by these designs, shipped them to the U.S. for detailed evaluation. These aircraft directly influenced the next generation of American jets and stealth technology decades later. The chemical weapons research captured by the U.S. revealed substances like sarin and tabun, deadly nerve agents that America had never encountered before. German scientists had developed them in secret, and the research was so advanced that the U.S. Army immediately began building its own chemical weapons program around the knowledge. Although America officially condemned chemical warfare, it continued to study these compounds behind closed doors for national security reasons. Much of this work was carried out by scientists who had previously worked for the Nazi war machine. Another controversial but historically significant contribution came from German medical research. During the war, Nazi scientists had gathered extensive physiological data through experiments on unwilling human subjects. While the methods were horrific and unethical, the data itself was extremely detailed, particularly regarding extreme temperatures, oxygen deprivation, infectious diseases, and high-altitude tolerance. After the war, there was a debate within the American medical community about whether this information should even be used. Ultimately, some of the data was quietly incorporated into U.S. military survival training, aerospace medicine, and high-altitude research, especially as America entered the jet age and then the space race. This remains one of the darkest ethical debates connected to Operation Paperclip. Beyond rockets and medicine, German contributions significantly shaped American radar systems, guided missile technology, infrared detection devices, submarine engineering, and even early computer development. Scientists like Walter Schreiber, Walter Dornberger, and Arthur Rudolph each played roles in different areas of U.S. military and aerospace development. Rudolph, for instance, played a central part in building the Saturn V rocket, but later faced legal scrutiny for his wartime role overseeing forced labor in underground V-2 factories. His case became one of the few moments where the U.S. government publicly acknowledged the ethical dilemma behind the operation. By the early 1950s, the Cold War had intensified. The Soviet Union tested its first nuclear bomb in 1949, launched long-range bombers, and expanded its influence into Eastern Europe. American intelligence agencies believed they were in a race for survival. Operation Paperclip scientists were now a central part of the United States' strategy to maintain technological superiority. Their work fueled the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles, early satellite systems, supersonic aircraft, and reconnaissance technologies. Some of the research even laid the groundwork for early missile defense systems. One of the lesser-known dimensions of Operation Paperclip was its intelligence value. Many German scientists had interacted with or observed Soviet forces during the final months of the war. Their testimonies gave the United States insights into Soviet military structure, research capabilities, and scientific ambitions. Some scientists had been captured by the Soviets temporarily and could describe the labs, engineers, and equipment they saw in Soviet hands. This information shaped American policy, budget decisions, and military planning throughout the 1950s. By the late 1950s, attention turned sharply towards space after the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957. For many Americans, this was a moment of national crisis. The idea that the USSR could place a satellite above American territory created political pressure and fear. The U.S. government needed immediate results. This urgency pushed Wernher von Braun and his team into the spotlight. They had been calling for a serious space program for years, but bureaucratic resistance had slowed progress. Now, the U.S. had no time to waste. Von Braun designed America's early satellites and launch vehicles, and his work paved the way for the Apollo program. When NASA decided to reach the moon, von Braun became the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket. This rocket remains one of the most powerful machines ever built. It stood 363 feet tall, generated 7.5 million pounds of thrust, and became the backbone of the Apollo missions. Every major component, the boosters, fuel systems, propulsion technology, and multi-stage design, was influenced by concepts that von Braun and his team had developed during the V-2 program. The technology was no longer a weapon. It was an engine for human exploration. But it was still rooted in a dark past. Throughout the 1960s, Operation Paperclip scientists continued working quietly inside NASA, the Department of Defense, and various aerospace contractors. Some became American citizens. Some received awards. Some lived comfortably in suburban neighborhoods, their pasts hidden behind sealed files. The general public had no idea that many of the heroes behind America's space triumph had once been part of the Nazi war machine. As new generations took leadership roles in government, questions began to emerge. Journalists and researchers started uncovering hints of operation files. War crime investigators reopened cases. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the U.S. Department of Justice launched inquiries into the wartime activities of certain scientists who had been protected under Operation Paperclip. A few were stripped of citizenship or voluntarily left the country. But most lived out their lives without facing legal consequences. Operation Paperclip eventually became public knowledge through declassified documents, investigative journalism, and congressional hearings. Even then, the full details were not revealed. Many records remain classified to this day, not because of scientific secrets, but because they contain politically sensitive information about how far the U.S. government went to protect these individuals. Historians estimate that America benefited immensely from the scientific advances gained through Operation Paperclip, but they also agree that the moral compromises were profound. The impact of Operation Paperclip is still visible today. Modern space exploration, satellite communication, missile defense technology, and aerospace engineering all carry traces of German innovation imported after World War II. The intelligence competition it sparked helped define U.S.-Soviet relations for decades. It shaped NASA's achievements, influenced military strategy, and contributed to America's global leadership in science and technology. But the ethical questions remain unresolved. Was it right for the United States to recruit scientists connected to a brutal regime? Was it justified to overlook crimes in the name of national security? Should scientific progress ever come at the cost of justice? These questions continue to be debated in universities, documentaries, and intelligence circles. What history cannot deny is this: Operation Paperclip changed the world. It altered the course of the Cold War, accelerated the space age, and helped define the technological dominance of the United States. And it remains one of the most complex, morally challenging, and consequential intelligence operations in modern history, where the line between right and wrong blurred in the shadows of a new global conflict.